On the afternoon of July 15th, 2010, 17-year-old Norma Lopez left school, excited to meet up with her friends. She took her usual route that she took every other time, cutting across an open field, not realizing that taking that route that day would ultimately cost her her life. Hi, welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I am Joe, that is my name, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. And since you're here, you might as well listen to a short story about murder. If this is your first time downloading and listening to 10-Minute Murder, welcome. Wherever you're listening right now, look at it. I feel like you're not looking at it. Make sure you look at it and find the place where you click to subscribe. When you do that, you don't miss any future episodes of this podcast. Also, in the episode notes, you'll find links to where you can connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. There's also a link in the episode notes to visit the merch store if you're interested in stickers and t-shirts and stuff like that. Now that I have rattled on enough, let's talk about today's story. It's about Norma Lopez, whose life was cut short one summer afternoon. It took a year for her killer to be identified and almost a decade for him to be finally punished. It was 2010, and Norma Lopez, a 17-year-old teenager from Moreno Valley, California, had a bright future ahead of her. She was known for waist-length hair, big brown eyes, and always flashing a vibrant smile. She loved putting on makeup, and she never left home without trying to look better than her sisters. She was set to graduate from high school the following year and planned to study fashion design in college, with the hopes that it would allow her to achieve her dreams of becoming a model. The year before her graduation, Norma decided to sign up for an advanced biology class at Valley View High School. Afterwards, she would usually head to nearby Cottonwood Avenue, where she, her older sister Sonia, and other local teenagers frequently hung out. This schedule was followed almost daily that summer of 2010, which is why her friends grew alarmed when she didn't show up on the afternoon of July 15th. Believing that maybe she was just running late, the group set off in the direction of the high school, hoping to run into her along the way. But as they were walking across that open field, one of them saw a binder, a purse, and a broken earring, all of which they knew were Norma's. There were also clear signs of a struggle that had taken place in the area, which drove them to alert the authorities and the Lopez family. The police immediately launched a search, but despite their best efforts, nothing else was found. On the fifth day of the investigation, a $35,000 reward was put up in exchange for any information that could lead to Norma's safe return. But unfortunately, just a few hours after this announcement, her body was found in a grove of olive trees about 2.5 miles away from where she was last seen. Naked from the waist up, her remains were partially decomposed, which indicated that she had been there for some time. The gruesome discovery sent shockwaves across Moreno Valley. According to Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco, quote, "The entire city was on edge because a random high school girl was randomly snatched from us. We had no answers for them, and everyone was afraid for their kids. It was a very trying time for the city, knowing that there was someone out there capable of doing that to a child, and we didn't know who they were." An autopsy ruled that Norma had died from homicidal violence, which is both vague and obvious. The doctor, the medical examiner, was unable to determine the exact cause of her death. He did speculate, though, that she had died from either strangulation or asphyxiation. Meanwhile, the authorities recovered a surveillance videotape that showed a green SUV speeding away from where Norma was last seen, but they were unable to trace its owner. Genetic material recovered from Norma's earrings was input into CODIS, the national database comprised of DNA profiles of convicted offenders. However, there were no matches found. It was another dead end, and given this lack of evidence, this case, unsurprisingly, went cold. No other developments were made until September of 2011, when genetic material from the earrings suddenly matched a sample belonging to 42-year-old Jesse Torres, whose DNA had been placed into the database after he was arrested on domestic violence charges. It was discovered that at the time of Norma's murder, he was living in Creekside Way, which was located very near Valley View High School. About a month after this breakthrough, Torres was arrested at his home in Long Beach, California. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Norma Lopez, as well as with her kidnapping. Despite the evidence against him, he maintained his innocence. The trial of Jesse Torres began in 2019, nearly a decade after Norma was murdered. Jesse Torres, of course, still claimed to be innocent, saying that he absolutely did not kill Norma, despite the fact that his DNA was found on her. Among the witnesses who took the stand was an unnamed woman who testified that in the past, Torres had attacked her and forced her into his car at knife point, where he raped her. When he was arrested, the police officers found explicit photos of this woman in his home, showing her naked and bound. It was this crime that had led to his domestic violence charge, which eventually resulted in him being identified as Norma's killer. Torres' wife had allegedly left him shortly before Norma's murder. According to the prosecution, his marriage troubles had caused him to be depressed and dependent on alcohol. It was also suggested that he often observed the teenager walking past his house on the way home from school. According to the prosecution, quote, he was looking out the window at teenage girls kissing their boyfriends on the corner. Each and every day he was watching. He was waiting. He was looking through the blinds. He was lusting. End quote. Unable to contain his lust any longer, he followed Norma on the afternoon of July 15, 2010. Torres then forced her into his SUV before ultimately murdering her. In his response to this argument, the defense, led by attorney John Doerr, pointed out that Torres was of a similar height to the teenager, which meant that it was impossible for him to have abducted her by himself. They also questioned the motive that the prosecution had presented, noting that sexual assault couldn't be proven due to the severity of the decomposed state of Norma's body. The defense poked holes in the DNA evidence as well, saying that the data inputted into CODIS could have been tainted since the crime scene had not been properly protected from contamination. In March 2019, after a month-long trial, Jesse Torres was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Norma Lopez. Even though Governor Gavin Newsom of California had already placed a moratorium on executions, the prosecution still pushed for the death penalty, saying, quote, he wanted her for his evil sexual gratification. What mercy did he show her? What sympathy? None. Norma is dead and that monster is not, and that's just wrong. End quote. The jurors agreed with the prosecution that the death penalty was a fitting punishment, considering the gravity of the crime. Their decision was upheld by the presiding judge, who said, quote, the killing of Norma Lopez and the dumping of her body like a piece of garbage can only be described as disgusting. The defendant displays an utter disregard for human life and is a threat to society. No question about that. In her victim impact statement, Norma's mother said, quote, I took Norma to school that day, not knowing that it was the last time I would ever see her again. In my house, there is no happiness, like how it was when Norma was here. Everywhere in the house, there was laughter and happiness. It was beautiful. But that all ended the day that Norma did not return home to us. 17-year-old Norma Lopez had her whole entire life ahead of her when she left school on that tragic summer afternoon in 2010, and a vicious killer decided to take all of that away from her. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. Thanks for listening. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, if you are brand new to 10-Minute Murder, I'm glad you listened today and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you are subscribed before you go. Wherever you're listening right now, find out where you subscribe, click that, and you will never miss another episode in the future, and you'll get them as soon as the episodes are released. Also, connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links for that are in the episode notes, or you can just type 10-Minute Murder into the search bar wherever you want to follow 10-Minute Murder, and it'll pop right up. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'm struggling. I'm under the influence of Benadryl, and I've sneezed about 47 times during this podcast. I have taken the liberty of editing out those sneezes so you won't hear a single one of them. You're welcome. But I'm hushing now. Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Be safe and make good choices.